So I want to welcome everyone here today and glad that you guys can join us. For our new teacher cadre, we are super excited to have Rick Fisher with us today he does the Thoughtful Classroom he's in association with Silver Strong and Associates, and he has agreed to be here with us today to talk to you guys about just some things that would help you all in your classroom. So without further ado, Mr. Rick Fisher.
Thanks, Chastity, and good afternoon, teachers. Wow, it's so great to be here with you, and I really thank you for taking the time. It's been a long day of teaching, and I certainly remember the long days of teaching, and then to come in after school for after school functions and do some learning or do some work, and it's hard to do sometimes. So I really appreciate you doing that. It's hard to get to know people through online resources, but I'll attempt to do the best I can. For me, I am a native Kentuckian, just like you. I'm over in Allen County in Scottsville, so almost 4-hour drive back towards Bowling Green. You probably know where Bowling Green is. And that's where I grew up. It's where I still live, and it's certainly my home. And like you, I was a teacher, a science teacher for many years, and I was a middle school guy, so we had to have two areas. So I taught some social studies, but I was a science teacher, and I taught a lot of science, and I really loved doing that. And as time went on and things came about, I became an administrator. I was a school principal for a long time. And then for the last 10 years that I was in the public schools, I was assistant superintendent for instruction over in Allen County. And I played that role for a decade. And it's really the only role I would want in the central office. I thought I wanted to be a superintendent. I trained my whole life to be one. And after about 3 or 4 years working as an assistant, I realized that a lot of times that, superintendents have to deal with so many things, and sometimes it's not directly related to teaching and learning. And man, that's one of my great passions in life, is teaching and learning. And so I decided for me, it wasn't a spot I was interested in. I would continue to pursue teaching and learning, and that was the role I played as the assistant superintendent. I focused on instruction, coaching teachers, working with teachers, instructional design, all those kind of things, and well, in fact, a lot of the things that I do now. And but my first experiences with a thoughtful classroom occurred almost 20 years ago, about 19. And I went to a co-op training where Harvey Silver and the Thoughtful Classroom were doing some training, much like we've been doing here and at your cooperative today. And it was my first year as being a principal. And man, the first day I knew I was in the right spot, because everything that was being said made sense to me. And I really saw a pathway to really help our school. And we were a low performing school when I took over as principal, and a lot of hard work on the part of our teachers and staff. And we really built a great organization there. But the vehicle that drove our capacity, our ability to change the direction for kids, help them learn more, remember it longer, was the tools and strategies and the structures of the thoughtful classroom. So our success story simply was that in 4 years' time, we went from not so good to the top 10% in the state of Kentucky and a national middle school to watch. And all of that started on my first day, I think, when I went to the thoughtful classroom. So I believe in the work that we do. And as Dr. Silver says, thoughtful classroom's been around for 50 years. You can't be around 50 years unless you're doing some stuff right. And so I think that speaks well to that. I know that you all are first-year teachers or just coming into the profession. And so I work with a lot of new teachers. across the land, and so it's one of my favorite things to do. In fact, I do a little work for Western Kentucky University, a university supervisor, where I work with teachers who are getting their masters, but they're not trained teachers, so they're getting that work, and I really enjoy it. So I'm excited to have a chance to spend some time with you all and help you. And that, hey, that's the key word here for me, is help you. I'm really here to help you, and I want you to know that you can text me, email me, call me if you have a question about our work and about something I can do to help you along the road here, because it doesn't just have to start when we have an online meeting, or if we have I think I'll be here some in person, and because I come here quite a bit, and I think some of those maybe are on in person, but I could be wrong about that. Either way, I'll be visiting with you a few times, and that's a little bit about me. And so we think about the thoughtful classroom, and we don't like to think about it as doing thoughtful classroom, because thoughtful classroom is not something you do; it's something you are. We really focus on how about I become a thoughtful educator. And when you hear the word thoughtful, I would like for you to think about it as I'm intentional, right? There's a plan, there's a structure. I'm always thinking about what's the next move. Teachers make more decisions in the course of a day than any other profession. The research bears this out. Our oldest son, is a physician. He likes to argue this point, but you can't argue it. Teachers make more decisions per day. How many decisions do you think teachers make in a day? Here's the number. 1,500 is how many instructional decisions a teacher makes in a day, because it's about designing a lesson and presenting a lesson. And there are a lot of moves, a lot of decisions that go into that process. You guys work with students with disabilities, and so you're constantly making decisions: what to do, what to say, when to say it, how to respond. All of these things are decisions, and they have to be made on the spur of the moment. And if you get them right, it's good. If you get them wrong, it's not so good. So it's a tough job. And so I think we have to think about and really consider our profession as the greatest profession in the world. There's a lot to be done. And so I just really want to help you think about, how do you get started in teaching? How can I help you make a move, help some situation, help something in your class? And so I want to get started right away with capturing some of your ideas. I've got a few things I want to share with you, but I don't want to just start throwing things out at you, because we do this all day long. I want to hear from you some of the things that you'd really want to focus on. And that way, if we don't do all those today, it'll give me something to plan for in the future days, so I can make sure that I'm, meeting the needs that you have currently. And as I find, sometimes you see something today, it's the old saying, I'm seeing it again for the first time. You might not see it today as, oh, that helps me, but maybe next week you go, oh, we talked about something. I need this right now. And that's what you might find happening. But anyway, let's focus on more. I want to focus on the word more, because sometimes more is just better, right? You can get one strawberry is a good thing, but man, I love strawberries, so I want a whole basket full of those things. So sometimes more is better. One scoop of ice cream is great, but three, better. And we love to go to the movies, and so you get the little popcorn or you get the bucket. I'm all about the bucket, right? And butter. That's just the way I roll. So sometimes more is better. So I want you to think about this question. If you could get your students to do more of something, what would that be? What are the mores for you? What I want my kids to do more of? What I want to see more of out of my students? But I'll give you a second to process. Ownership. Okay. Would that be a good way to characterize it? You want them to take ownership? Be more responsible. One of the things we say in the thoughtful classroom is we want kids to be responsible, but we also want them to be response-able. So we want them to be able to respond. And so how do we look at, say, what are you not doing this responsibly? And how can we work on that and make you more response-able, building response-able students? Confidence. Critical ingredient, confidence. It's huge for all kids, really huge for students with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to share some more slides here, and we're going to talk about some particular tools. And some of the tools that I had planned on sharing today attack many of the problems that you have described here, and some that I'm sure that were on your mind that we just, if we went through everybody, would have come up. So I want to begin with this idea of, what words come to your mind when you hear the word foundation? When you hear foundation, what comes to mind? We all have foundations, right? We have family, our faith, cultural beliefs, professions. You have a lot of foundations in our life, and solid foundations are absolutely critical to supporting growth and development. If you think about, any kind of structure, right? Without a solid foundation, anything built on something different can't be supported, and eventually it will fail. So, what happens when you have a poor foundation? Well, it's like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's not on a firm foundation, so it's leaning, it's falling over. And so the critical thing to remember here is that without a solid foundation, doesn't matter what else we do. It doesn't matter the textbooks we buy, the strategies we try, or the things we do. They will eventually crumble. At best, they'll be less effective. And so establishing a firm foundation for learning is critical. You have to create the culture that you want. So let's ask this question. What foundations do all successful classrooms have? Every classroom that's very successful, if we define success as, kids learn and kids grow and develop, that's successful classroom. They're happy, they're excited, they're curious. All of these words might be consistent with a successful classroom. One of the things that the research is very clear is, and you can read this in numerous texts, that a successful classroom is much more than a well-managed one. There's a lot more to just managing classrooms. Sometimes, back in the old days when I started teaching, if as long as the kids didn't have you tied up and they were sitting there being quiet, that you're just doing a great job. But we know today that's not defined. That's not a successful classroom. That's just a compliant one. And so management is a component, certainly, of successful classrooms, but it is not the defining moment, a defining term for a successful classroom. We have, in the thoughtful classroom, we have researched this over and over, worked with and talked with hundreds of teachers across the land. And when we pulled all this data in, much like what we just did, right? What do you want more of? It really can galvanize that into four foundations, four cornerstones that make a foundation, right? A cornerstone is a very important part of the structure, right? And so having these four cornerstones in your class, working with your students, will really improve everything else. So let's think about these four cornerstones for a minute from a big picture standpoint. The first one is organization, rules, and procedures. So that's the first cornerstone. The second is building positive relationships. Now, You might say, well, okay, positive relationships, me and my students, but it goes way beyond you and your student. That is important, 100%. But there's two other relationships. The other two relationships are students to students and students to your content. You see, we have to build a relationship between the content you teach, the content you need kids to focus on. And a lot of you may be in collaborative classes, so you're responsible for helping support kids' math, reading, language arts, science, social studies, maybe even the arts. And so one of our tasks is to build a connection between what you're learning and the child. And that's usually some type of personal connection, some type of relevance piece. You're looking for those kind of things to make sure that kids are making those kind of connections. The third cornerstone is called engagement and enjoyment. And you mentioned this. We wanted participation, we wanted listening, we wanted kids to be more responsible. We want them to take more ownership. See, these are all engagement types of things. And so how do we get kids to lean in, pay attention, listen, follow what they're supposed to do? And how do we have fun? You know, school should be a place that you enjoy. And that doesn't mean we're going to have a pizza party every day and then we're going to, we're going to watch cartoons. It's about helping kids connect to content in a way that's pleasurable, because we know that learning is pleasurable. It's a human nature, right? I mean, it's human nature. Our fourth cornerstone is building a culture of thinking and learning, a culture of thinking, so that you know that when kids come to your class or you go to collaborative class and you're working with them there, there's a certain way that things are expected to be done. So this is really, expectations live in here. And you really have to have a set of expectations. And figuring out, I think that's the hardest thing for new teachers, is to figure out, what's my expectation? And figuring that out, because that's important. Don't expect more than you're willing to fight for. Because if you have expectations and you say, gosh, I don't have time to chase that down, I don't have time to worry about that, I don't have time to fix that, then don't make it an expectation, because you're only hurting yourself. You say, I expect you to do this, when kids don't do it. If you can't respond to that, then, oh, well, so they're really out. So the next thing that you're really passionate about, this is what I want, this is what I expect. They're like, but really, but is it really an expectation? Maybe not. And so you're fighting them, right? You start battling them, and that's how those things start creeping in. And so when you figure out what you want to expect, what's the culture of my class, that's a huge ingredient. You know, I talked about my first days as a principal, and one of the things I wanted to do is create a culture of thinking in our school. I wanted kids to know that when you cross the threshold of our school, things are different. I'm going to be expected to work. I'm going to be expected to, do the job. And we have structures in place to support that. And so organization, rules, and procedures, we have things in place to support making sure that you come in and do your schoolwork. And if you don't do your schoolwork, what are you going to do? How are we going to respond to that? And so we had to figure out as a school, how do we respond to kids who don't do their work? And we had a response for that. And so that was one we were going to fight over, right? That we're going to hold this line every single time. So building a culture of thinking and learning, really focusing on thinking. All of us have different capacities to remember things. I'm terrible at remembering names. Can't do it. I mean, I really need to figure out some strategy to remember names. Other people never forget a name. And so we don't always have this, memorize and remember the same things at the same rate at the same time. We're just different people. But the thing we all can do, the Lord gave us a brain, and that brain can think. And so we find the power in thinking and rationalizing and building those habits and routines. And so that's a culture of thinking and learning. I'll pause. We want to always give a chunk and pause and let that sink in and see if there are any questions or comments or needs around this idea of the four cornerstones, a foundation for a successful classroom. But there's some common challenges to the first cornerstone. Look at this information. More than 80% of behavior problems in the classroom have nothing to do with discipline. It has to do with lack of procedures and routines. 80%. So this is a huge number. So if you think about your own class and you say, I've had some things that are causing me some problems. I think they're behavior problems. Johnny won't sit down. Johnny won't do this. Susan's, these kind of things. Sometimes it's about procedure and about routine. And in the thoughtful classroom, we really are the how people. How do you take a problem and solve a problem? As I always say, if you have a problem, there's a tool for that. We have a tool, tools and strategies to solve instructional problems. And I want to focus on a couple of tools that you might find helpful. But before we move on to that, here are 4 indicators, and these are aligned to Danielson framework, the thing that we here in Kentucky are evaluated on and we focus on as part of our instructional development. But if we look at these 4 indicators, take a moment and just pore over those. So what stands out to you? Which one do you think, oh boy, that's a big one for me? That's the one I'm struggling with. If you put in the chat, let's consider number 1, the first one, actively engaging students in developing and clarifying their procedures and behaviors, establishing as number 1, and establishing clear learning targets, number 2. Number 3 would be the next one, and then the last one's number 4. We know learning targets are not for the teacher, but for the student. And that's a great shift. We always thought that learning targets were really for the principal. It's like, I got to get those learning targets on the board so the principal comes in and gives me a check mark and says, hey, you're good. You got your targets up, right? And then people would say, that's doing us no good. It's, not too far off from right? Just putting them on the board, never saying anything about them, but they are listed. They're over there. Is really not what the intention for that is. They're not, learning targets are not for the principal. Learning targets are not for the teacher. Learning targets are for the kids. That's a simple shift. If you take learning targets out in your collaborative classes, you want to be connecting that, right? You're making that relationship. Hey, in math today, our learning targets, or in math this week, our big idea. It may not be in all the little pieces because you're dealing with scaffolded work, but some piece of that is going to be a part of the target. Here's where we're trying to go. And all kids have to achieve the same level. We teach kids the same, and in terms of their expectation, we're trying to get you to the correct grade level. That's the goal. That is the goal. Never accept anything less. Your brand new teachers don't accept, well, my kids, they can't really do that. You've already doomed them. Expect them to work towards trying to get that. And so absolutely what you're saying is pull those targets in and say, hey, in math, here's our learning target. So this is what we're working on. Today, we're going to work on this piece, which is a step towards making this target. So you're connecting the kids. This is my goal. Everybody, goals are powerful things, and targets help us create the goals. And I'll do some work possibly around the learning targets because, man, there's some powerful ways to make that engaging and helpful for students. You really want to make sure, the brain, if you think about it this way, the time you went to pick up a box of cans or a box of jars or a box that was, man, this is heavy. And you go to pick that box up and you grab it and you jerk it up and it's empty. It turned out to be empty. What happens? You get that boom jerking motion, right? You go flying backwards because Your brain said, okay, that box is full of something. We're going to have to put you back into this. So we're going to ratchet up your muscles, and you're going to have to go in there and get it and get on it to get it picked up. And then when it's not, you had too much power dialed up to do. Brain does the same thing with learning. When you go in and see the learning targets today, what are the success criteria? What do I have to be able to do today to be successful? See, that sizes things up for the brain and says, here's what you're going to have to do today. Here's how much oomph you're going to have to get through the day, to get through this lesson. And it also, interestingly enough, learning targets reduce anxiety for that very same reason. It tells the brain, here's what we're doing. So we're very clear. There isn't any mystery here today. This is what we're going after. This is our goal. So it really lowers student anxiety. So it's a powerful thing, learning targets. How many of you have a junk drawer at home, right? You have a junk drawer. I have a junk drawer. What's the greatest thing about a junk drawer? Anything you need, it's in there. That's the greatest thing about a junk drawer. But we don't want our classrooms to look like a junk drawer. We want them to look like the silverware drawer, right? That there's some organization and there's some procedures or routine procedures to them. And so we want to think about that, right? We want to think about this idea of procedures. We have all kinds of procedures in school, right? From the very first moment you walk in school, teachers have procedures, kids have procedures. We're all going to the cafeteria, you're going to the gym, you sit down, and then we're going to class. And then when you get into class, what do you do? There's routines, right? So routines are very important. But if they're not done correctly, drive you crazy. It's one of the biggest problems teachers report is, man, I can't get kids to talk when they're supposed to. I can't get kids to, line up good for recess. I can't get kids to stay focused. And so these are all procedures, routines that we have in school every day. And if we don't have these really clear, it causes a lot of problems. So a lot of times we have students who, have these problems. So what's causing it, right? Why do some kids have so much trouble following rules, following procedures? Well, some of the things that we discover is that sometimes it's lack of clarity in how to carry out the procedure. I really just don't know what you want me to do. I don't know what you want me to do. It's not clear enough. We oftentimes assume kids know what we want them to do. And sometimes they really just don't. Sometimes you just have a lack of sufficient time to practice the procedure. You see, we're so caught up sometimes in, I've got so much to do. I got so much to cover, so much to teach. I don't have time to spend time on procedure. You see, time you put into teaching procedures and routines will save you so much instructional time on the back end. So taking time to do that, but this is a common root of the problem and a lack of ownership, a failure for kids to internalize the procedure. It's just like, well, this is what the teacher makes me do, but I don't have any ownership in that. Man, I want to get kids to have more ownership. And so how do we get kids to have more ownership in just the routines and structures of school? So how can we teach these procedures so that students can remember them and carry them out independently? So here is the first tool that I'm going to share with you. I'm going to try to get two in today. This one's called Procedural Pro. And Procedural Pro simply does that. It helps kids get the guided practice on here's my classroom routines, here's my classroom procedures. And so I recommend to teachers that you spend over the first month of school, the first 2 months of school, if you have to, teaching my procedures. Here's how it works. So let me show you how this particular tool works. I'll get my words together here in a minute. So 3 basic steps to Procedural Pro. We're going to first present the procedure. when I first took over as principal, the school was operating under was 760 some kids in the school that was built for 600 and some kids, and so we had a lot of kids, and we had no bell system, and we had no structure by which to change classes. So when the bell sounded, 760 kids poured into the hallways, and it was mass chaos. From there, fights and various other kinds of things took place, and we were always chasing. Cornerstones are not just a classroom thing; they're a school thing. So you think about your classroom structures and procedures and organizations. You think about the school classroom procedures and organizations, and for us, that wasn't a very good one. And so right off the bat, I mean, we got to do something different about this. And so what makes sense here? What makes sense is that we're going to walk down the hallway in a single file line, just like we drive a car on the right-hand side of the hall. And people said, you can't do that, Rick. You can't do that. People will be climbing the wall. Parents will be out here throwing a fit. There's no way you can go to get kids to walk in a straight line all around through the school. So, well, I think that's what we have to do because it'll be safe. It's about safety, right? It's about instruction. Learning is what we're here to do, and you're spending so much time dealing with the problems that happen between classes. We're losing instruction times. We have to fix it. So what do I do? The first thing we did, Procedure Pro, present and explain. So we got all the kids into the gymnasium, and I set up a row of chairs across the middle of the floor. And I asked for volunteers. If you ask for volunteers in middle school, you can quickly get 100 people, but I got 50. I needed 50. I got 50 kids out, 25 on one side and 25 on the other. So picture this in your mind. The gym floor has some chairs sitting about a hall's width across from each other, running across the gym floor from sideline to sideline. And I asked 25 kids to get on this side of the hall and 25 kids to get on the other side of the hall. And I said, now I want you guys to go from one side to the other. And so they did. They proceeded on. So they met each other about half court, and then there was this mingle dance, right? I got to scoot past you because the hall's, I've set them up so it's about the width of the hall. And so they weren't punching and knocking each other, but they had to squeeze by. Kids recognize this, right? Yeah, this is what we have every day. Actually, that was pretty tame. And so I said, so we need to change that procedure. And here's what we're going to do. We have to be safe and all the things I just talked about. Now, I want you guys to line up in a straight line on the right-hand side of the hall, just like we drive a car. Now, you guys do the same thing. Now, go from one side of the gym to the other. And the kids went walking right past each other. It was I wish I'd filmed this because the whole audience went, oh, I get it. Okay, I mean, I like it, but I get it. And so we were presenting and explaining the procedure. Here's how it works. Here's what we're going to do. Every time you leave the classroom, leave the gym, leave the cafeteria, you walk in a single file line on the right-hand side. And boy, we surveyed the kids in just 3 months' time, and 87% of the kids said, you know, I haven't heard anybody getting punched. I haven't seen anybody getting punched, nobody getting cussed, knocked, threatened, none of that stuff. It was absolutely a flip-flop from a survey we had done before, where 80-something% said, yeah, I've seen all those things in the hallway. So presenting and explaining is the first step. Rehearse and reinforce. So that's what we do, right? You rehearse and reinforce. Let's practice, 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 practice till we get it right. The things that are very important to you, that you expect to get done, that you need to get done, you rehearse them, you practice them every day until they become routine, till they become automatic. This is the way we do it. This is what I expect. And that's the way it goes. And so you reinforce it. Great job today. I like the way you did that. How do we reinforce in the hallways? Every teacher stood in the middle of the hallway on class changeovers. And anytime kids were coming, from large groups of kids coming from A to B, and teachers reinforced single file lines on the right-hand side. And you know what? I never had one parent call me about that because it made sense and it made our school safe and it made the learning happen better. So present, explain, practice, reinforce, and this is a gradual release model. Okay? I do, we do, You do. And so as time goes on, right, you as kids then take responsibility. We have to be less. We reinforce and we rehearse all the time, but we don't have to do it all the time. We don't have to be on guard all the time because kids, it becomes routine. And we would have kids in the story I'm telling here, we would have kids come for like an academic competition or a science Olympiad or something where we had some different kinds of things that happened during the day. And our kids would be like, y'all walk down the hallway in a single file line, and the kids would be like, yeah, boy, this is how we do it. It's so great. And it was just nice to see kids taken up for a procedure you might think they wouldn't like. So procedural pro, present it, rehearse it, release it so that kids take the responsibility for it. Now, I don't want you to think about this just as, oh, okay, so it's how do we go from the gym to the classroom and how do we line up to go to recess and lunch? True, yes, those things. But I want you to think about it in all your instructional time. When you wanted to teach kids how to have a conversation, you want to teach the kids a procedure in mathematics. You want to teach the kids a procedure in how to use their resources to answer questions and solve problems, how to use their scaffolds, right? And their supporting things. You got to teach all those procedures and you got to rehearse them and reinforce them until finally the kids, they just do it. It's just, it's automatic. I don't think about it anymore. I got it. But don't limit it just to moving around the classroom or behavior. Think about it as everything instructionally I want kids to be able to do. I got to present and explain it. I got to rehearse and reinforce it. And then I'm going to say, hey, now you own it, right? So you're a part of it. It's what you do. Yeah. And so does this tool work? Oh, come on, Rick, does this really work? Hey, here's the data we've collected from teachers. Here's what teachers tell us they see more of when they switch to an idea of procedural pro. They see kids with more clarity about how to carry out their procedures, and they have fewer behavior problems. Competent learners who know what to do and build confidence. That was one of our things, right? Someone said, I want my kids to have more confidence. And competence helps them become more confident learners and more committed students who follow the procedures. So more kids do what they're supposed to without me having to tell them 1,000 times a day. Boy, that's worth a lot just to be able to do that. So that's procedural pro, and a really great and simple tool to think about getting your procedures done. And another challenge in Cornerstone 1 is getting kids to complete tasks. And someone said, I want them to just do their homework, right? Study, do what you're supposed to do. And so this is a common challenge, and we can work around that through the structure a little bit. So let's look at another tool. So you may have kids who struggle to complete assignments or, don't do them correctly. And you're not alone because this is a struggle for all us all, right? So why do some kids fail to complete assignments or fail to complete them successfully? Well, is it because of the lack of effort? Is it because they're not ready for that? They can't do it? Or it's an ability issue? Possibly. But what we find is the number one reason is that kids weren't sure about what I'm supposed to do or how to do. We discovered this in our school with math teachers, with math students, because one of the rules we had as part of our culture is if you didn't do your work, you had to stay after school and make it up. They sent the teachers sent them to my office, and I called the parent and said, hey, you're behind 3 assignments and you have to stay over and start and make those 3 up. And when you get them made up, you don't have to stay after school anymore. That was just the rule. And we reinforced it. And I got a chance to have a lot of conversations with my math students because they were often having homework every night, of course. And although we tried to work on some structure of that, and so it was good homework, useful, fit some rubrics for us. But anyway, they didn't get done. So I would ask kids, how come you didn't do it? I didn't know how. Well, okay, that's kind of, okay, that could be a cop out, right? So you didn't know how. What do you mean you didn't know? I don't know how to do it. And I said, well, what did you not know how to do? And boy, listen to what I heard from kid after kid after kid. I can't do the ones at the end. What do you mean? Well, there's 10 problems or, 15 problems, whatever it is. I can't do the last ones. Well, why not? Here's something else kids said. I don't know how to do it. It looks different. What do you mean it looks different? It doesn't look like the others. Well, how'd you know how to do the others? Well, the teacher modeled some of those, showed me what to do, so I understood the process. But these others, they look different. They're all turned around. I can't figure out how to do them. And I heard that over and over and over and over with kids. And so, it was a lack of clear understanding about the conceptual structure, right? It was the same concept, just set up in a different order. And so the kids like, I don't know how to deal with that. So we were memorizing on formulas and not sure about how do we do this? How do we properly handle these kinds of things? So it was just a miscommunication. And so we taught the kids, here's how you handle that. And it drastically reduced that particular problem. So why are clear directions more important now than ever before, right? We're doing a lot of more project-based learning, problem-based learning. We're making the shift, right, to students doing more of the thinking and doing, collaborating together. So there's a lot of flow there. The shift is not as many teachers directing this. And then of course we still have in places in RTI days, virtual and asynchronous learning. And John Hattie, you're probably familiar with John Hattie, a huge researcher, says that teacher clarity is one of the most potent influences on student achievement. So this is a big deal. So if that's important, what are some questions that both teachers and students should be asking before planning an assignment? Now, some of you who said about number 4, we're talking, here's maybe some things that might help you out of number 4. Okay, so let's think about what questions do we need to ask to make sure our students are clear on what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it, and how they know they're successful. So maybe it's, what's the task? Who's responsible? When do I start the work and when is it due? How do I complete this task? What am I supposed to do? If I'm stuck or I don't know what to do or that problem looks different to me, what do I do? How do I get help? What do I do with it when I'm finished? And how will I know if I've got it right? What's my criteria for evaluation? So these are 7 good questions that if we answer these questions for kids, we could drastically change some of these problems of, hey, I didn't know. And what did you say? What did you say we're supposed to do? What was that again? And you answer that same question a dozen times during the day. See, if you're answering that question a bunch of times, you tell some kids, here's the directions, and they're coming over to you and what did you say? Then you know, oh, I've got a clarity problem. Kids didn't understand my directions or didn't pay attention. That's procedure. We call this tool the 7-step directions. And boy, it is a fan favorite. I'm telling you, the teachers love this tool. 7-step directions is a framework of questions that will really help your kids complete their assignments more successfully, clarify instructions, the expectations, what to do, when to do it, what happens when you get stuck before they ever start. And so this takes a huge burden off of you. You can even put this online and parents can find it. And a lot of teachers say, I'm just putting that out on my webpage or whatever social media you're using. Here's the task. So parents have it. Everybody knows what's going on. Tremendous. Let's pay attention to this a minute. So step number 1, you're going to plan your assignment. Okay, and this is a big assignment, right? It's not like a daily type of thing. It's this week, we're going to work on these things, and these things are what we're going to try to accomplish. And so you lay out the task, and ask yourself those questions, these questions, the ones we just talked about. So what's the task? Who's going to do the task and how long do they have to complete it? When should you do it? What are the steps? What happens if you need help? What do you do with it when you're finished? How am I going to evaluate you? 7 simple answers to 7 simple questions. Save you so much grief. Then you put your answers on the 7-step direction organizer. Looks like this teacher's example here. So this was a writing concept that the teacher wanted to do. And so the task was, as a concerned citizen, take a stand on whether the Senate should or should not pass a law changing the configuration of their judges on the Supreme Court. Okay. And so, and you can see they have the who and the when and the how. So here's here's what you got to do. Here are the steps in writing. And so as a teacher, you can say, don't ask me a procedural question that's in the 7-step directions. I'm not going to spend my classroom energy answering those questions. I've given you that information. If you have a question about the learning or something different, 100%, you come to me. I'm here to help you. But you teach them procedural pro. This is our procedure. I'm going to give you all this information. You have it, and we're going to learn to function with it that way. And you can see how this teacher proceeded on through that. Step number 3, go over this with the kids before they start working on the task. You got to go over it with them. Here are the things. Walk through each piece. Let students see the questions 1 step at a time, going through it. Have kids explain it now. So what does this assignment say we're doing? Address any questions. You're really spending time. You're really spending the time up front to save you all kinds of time on the backside. Step number 4, you want to prepare the kids for success by teaching them to seek out the answers to the 7-step directions independently or with peers before beginning work. So if there's any conversations, you want to have that with your friend. Once we get started, we're on. Here's the thing. And if kids know that they have these answers in mind before they start to work, this really helps them complete the task because they've internalized it. They've owned it, right? There's some ownership in this. Oh, okay, I got it. I don't have any other questions. I clearly understand what you've asked me to do. And I had a chance to ask my teacher, and I had a chance to ask a peer, and we talked about it. And so we've done several things there to make sure we understand what the job is. And so here was another task of a 6th grade teacher, and this was they were writing a letter. And so this teacher worked on the who, the when, the how. So what's my audience? Here's your audience. Here's the role. The how, look at that. List reasons the owner would not want pets. Brainstorm counterclaim arguments. Use the argument writing frame organizer to plan. And then how am you going to be measured? You're going to be measured using the state scoring guide that's in your writer's notebook. So that's 7-step directions. Very simple, but boy, it'll really save you a lot of time. So again, hundreds of teachers, we collect this data. And here's what teachers say. When they use 7-step directions, kids are planning before they start a task. They're really thinking about it. The time on instruction is they got more time on instruction than giving instructions. That they become more independent learners. That was an ownership piece, right? Capable of working through a task on their own. So you teach them. You teach them how to do it and expect them to do it, and you will be amazed at the results. They're very clear on how to get started and what they're supposed to do. And ultimately, what we're looking for, right, is successful completion of work by the students. And as I said before, if you post this out somewhere, then parents really love this too, because it informs them. Here's all I need to know about what you're supposed to do. So you can't come home and say, I don't have any work. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, so I'm not going to do it tonight. Yeah, I have it right here. I'm looking at it. Here's the things you're supposed to be doing, and here's when it's due. So it really helps parents too, and people love that too. Well, I know that that's a lot, and I'm coming up on the end of my 1 hour, but I hope that you're able to find some help in these two thoughtful classroom tools: Procedural Pro and 7-step directions. Thanks again for everybody, and look forward to seeing you soon.